Just taking it easy right now. I'd been a little sick, so I'm not going to strain my voice. And we're going to talk about Ixalan, the gold cards. It used to be, all multicolored cards had a gold border back in the day. They kind of still do. So yeah, multicolor. We're going to start with the commons and uncommons, which in this case, there's just one for every color pair at the uncommons. These are like the signpost draft uncommons, if you will. Most of these are good. We'll talk about one or two that are not as well. Bartolome del Presidio. White-black, 2/1, legendary creature vampire knight. Again, these are all uncommons. Sacrifice another creature or artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on this. I probably don't have to tell you, because you've probably seen it. It's good. This card can take all of your token artifacts, whatever variety they may be, or your little token creatures, or your little value creatures, and it can just become enormous. The only drawback is that it's legendary. Otherwise, if you could have more than one of these out, of course you would. You'd start building up two at the same time, so if one gets taken out by a removal spell, you still got another one as a backup. But that being said, this is still a fantastic instant speed, mana-free, repeatable sacrifice outlet. And that is something that's been sorely missing from Aristocrats decks for a long, long time. You gotta commit to white in order to do it, but that's not too much of a drawback, is it? Anyway, great card. Would work in a vampire deck, is probably okay in a knight's deck, for what that's worth. And obviously amazing for Aristocrats. If you want to brew up Aristocrats decks in this color combination, it's a sure thing. Captain Storm, Cosmium Raider. This is another incarnation of Lannery Storm. A blue and a red. We got a 2/2 legendary human pirate. Whenever an artifact ETBs under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target pirate you control. If nothing else, that will be this card. So, even if you have no other pirates in the deck to play with this card, just as artifacts are coming in, can be tokens as well, then at least this card at least is going to get enormous. Seems great. Probably not hard to get a few artifacts into your pirate deck. Also, probably not too hard to make a blue-red artifacts deck that you happen to cram this into as an artifact payoff. As I said, you don't need any other pirates. She will happily boost herself sky high to the moon. Now you might be thinking, without trample or first strike or whatever, is that really worth it? On a 2-drop, yes. Even in our current standard, if your 2-drop gets enormous, that still counts. It's when they cost like 6 mana and they don't have trample that becomes like a problem. Or flying, or, menace, something. Anyway, great card, but you do want to, brew around this with artifacts and be in the colors. So it's a little narrow, but still pretty nice for an uncommon. Zoyoa Lava Tongue. So we have another 2 mana, 2 power multicolor card. So this is a 2/2 Goblin Warlock for a black and a red. Legendary, once again. I think these are all legendary. Has Death Touch, so alright, that's good. At the beginning of your instep, if you descended this turn, which the little reminder text up here says, you descend each time a permanent card is put into your graveyard from anywhere. It could be mill, could be discard, could be something dying from the battlefield. Just from anywhere. It has to be a card. token won't do. So, at the end step, if you descended, each opponent may discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. Already sounds pretty good. And it deals 3 damage to each opponent who did not. So, it's aggressive. As long as you're descending reliably, and that's not hard to pull off. Right, there's a huge variety of decks that might, for one reason or another, end up descending. It doesn't just have to be aristocrats. It doesn't just have to be mill. You know, there's a lot of ways to build it. Then this is going to be reliably bolting your opponent for 3 damage to the face. If they decide they want to start conserving their life total, then it's going to start eating away at their cards or their permanents. If they happen to have a bunch of token artifacts or little token permanents to sacrifice, this won't be as good. But you can start this off pretty early in the game. So, this is like something you would pair with braids, right? The new, I mean, I say new, she's not that new at this point, but she'll be in standard for a long, long time. The 3-drop braids. Zoyoa and that braids go really well together. You know, they've got these dual in-step triggers that are, you know, probably making your opponent take damage or lose life. Or sacrifice a bunch of stuff. Anyway, that sounds like a good time. And it feels like there's enough ways to turn this card on that if you're in this color combination, you might want to look out for, you know, ways to be using this card. I think it could be a real tool in the toolbox, not for just like a single narrow deck application. Now this card, Itzquinth, Firstborn of Gishath. This little dinosaur, I mean, okay, so it's an okay haste creature, right? Red and a green, 2/3 with haste. Totally serviceable haste creature. That's fine. You know, you'd wish that it wasn't legendary, so you could have, like, you know, all 4 of them come out and attack, but it would be fine if that's all it did. But you want to get all the value off the card, so it has this other thing it can do. When it ETBs, you may pay 2 colorless. If you do, target dinosaur you control, which can be itself, deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. It's not a fight. It's a, you know, this creature's power over there kind of effect. So it's a bite, not a fight, I think is the way we say it. And since it can use the ability on itself, it's actually not as narrow as it seems at first glance. Right, as a 4-drop, if the only dinosaur you have is itself, then it's not much better than the card from Kamigawa, where you could channel it to deal 2 damage, or it comes down as like a 2/3 reach creature that deals 2 damage to any target. If that's all this card did, I would say it would be in contention with that card. And no one hardly plays that card from Kamigawa. But there are some things that are better about this card. You can't channel it for 2 for burn, but it can come out and be a source of recursive damage on 2, which might be better. If you have other dinosaurs laying around, then you could very handily do 5 or 6 damage to your opponent's creature, which can kill almost anything. And eventually, if they get a little bigger, or you get a Tali out or something, it kills just about every card in the format, if you deal that much damage to it. I mean, not quite. It doesn't cover every situation, like, you know, the angel with the shield counters and stuff, but still. This is a really solid effect. Almost passable in a non-dinosaur deck. I think not quite. It's like right on the borderline if you don't have dinosaurs. In a dinosaur deck, heck yeah, play it. It seems like a useful tool for the toolbox. Nikanzel, Current Conductor. green and a blue. This is a 2/3, so pretty chunky for the mana cost. Good blocker. Legendary creature Merfolk Scout. Whenever a creature you control explores a land card, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. That seems like it could get a little nutty. Especially if you had the green enchantment for 3, Spelunking? Where lands enter the battlefield untapped. Then it seems like this could maybe start to get a little ridiculous at that point. And whenever a creature you control explores a non-land card, you put a +1/+1 counter on this. So basically, if your creature would get a counter, this also gets a counter. So then you've got a couple of creatures growing, and that's nice. If you're hitting lands, it almost feels like there's a combo. Maybe not like an infinite combo, but something that could get you a kind of dumb amount of value. Because as long as you can keep making explore triggers and keep hitting lands, and if you had Spelunking to where they were coming in untapped, it feels like this could go on for a while. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how that could like really chain off, but it seems like there's potential there. And just in terms of value, there's a ton of value here. This turns exploring into just hard ramp by getting more lands onto the battlefield. And it also makes your creatures grow, right? Your explore creatures, if they hit the +1 counter, they're already maybe a little bigger than normal for their mana cost. So they're, aggressive at that point. And this is just adding another aggressive body, also building up counters on the battlefield. So between the power toughness and the value and the ramp, there's a lot to like here. And it's only for a deck that can do a lot of exploring. So this one's a narrow piece. So if you're not interested in doing this deck, then don't craft it. I wouldn't call this a universal tool for the toolbox. This is more like a specific deck idea, which may or may not work. Akawali, the Seething Tower. So, 3 mana, black, green, and 1. For a 3/3, legendary creature fungus. So, shout out to Fallen Empires and all those Thalids and Saprolings. So this card has 2 different Descend targets. It has Descend 4. As long as there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, this gets +2/+2 and has Trample. So, it goes from being a very unexciting 3/3 for 3 into being a 5/5 Trampler for 3. And that, if you can do it consistently, is probably worth the trouble. That's around the size of, kind of what the dinosaur deck is threatening. Right? They've got a 6/6 without Trample. Or, just 5/5 Trample for 3 is a really good, solid spot for being aggressive. Worth your time. But it also has Descend 8 that you can turn on. As long as there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, this gets an additional +2/+2 and can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. So then it's a 7/7 Trampler that can only be blocked by 1 thing. And that makes it very likely to connect and to trample over something and damage the opponent. Maybe they put a Death Toucher in front of it like Sholdred and absorb some of that attack and they trade, but still. If you're attacking with this and trading with Sholdreds, you're probably in the better position compared to the opponent. Now, the only reason I'm a little hesitant on this card is because the self-mill deck has an amazing array of 2-drops, right? 2 mana creatures that are just utterly devastating. Enough to easily make a deck that's 60 or more cards, with a whole lot of Lurgoyfy 2-drops. Does this make it in as a 3-drop? Well, this is an uncommon, so maybe you're on a budget. Maybe you're making a budget version of a self-mill deck. You're building up to being able to unlock all those rares, and maybe that's where you play this. I still don't think a 1-of copy of it would be bad, even in a competitive standard deck. Just, it's for a kind of a narrow, niche kind of deck. It doesn't go into every kind of toolbox, so I'm not going to tell you to run out and craft it. But I think it could be playable. Kutzil, Malamet Exemplar. Green, white, and 1. We have a 3/3 for 3. Legendary creature, Cat Warrior. It says, your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. Okay. Alright. That's a thing. That's a thing that probably must be dealt with. Now, one of the interesting bits about this card is its creature types are not that competitive. You could get, Cavern of Souls or whatnot, named Cat or Warrior. And if you make this uncounterable, then you could play this card, and then this card makes all of your other spells uncounterable, not just creatures. Not just cats and warriors. I mean, if your opponent can't cast spells during your turn, then what? They could channel? They could channel, like, the big crab from Kamigawa? That would make a trigger that would counter a spell? Basically, it just shuts off instant speed shenanigans on your turn. And if you make certain that this sticks, then if it sticks, that means they can't bounce it at the end of your turn. They can't flash in, the big domain exile enchantment. You know the one I mean. They can't do that on your turn. They have to go back to their turn at sorcery speed to try to clean up this mess. And that makes me think that maybe this is a tool that could go into a wide variety of decks. It's kind of like, they used to call 2/2s for 2 with abilities like this hate bears. This is more like a hate elephant, harkening back to Trained Armadon. Whenever one or more creatures you control has more text, each with power greater than its base power deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Now that line sounds like it's a bit tricky. Like you have to figure out some way to get a creature's power greater than its base power. In practice, that's not hard to do most of the time. You'll have some team pumping effect. It gives your creatures +1/+1, or a little piece of equipment, or a little combat trick. You might have a token aura from Wilds of Eldraine. There's a lot of little ways that a creature's power can be higher. +1/+1 counters are in this color combination for sure. So that aspect of the card I leave as a puzzle to be solved by the viewer. But the first line of text, your opponent can't cast spells during your turn. That's powerful. That trips up some people. Shuts off entire decks to where they must get it off the field, and if they can't stop it from getting back on the field, they could be in big trouble. Because if you can get this down, then the opponent can't muck with your spells during your turn. They can't interact, hardly. And that last bit, as more added value. You might be able to draw some extra cards with it on top of that ability. Caparocti Sunborn. This is 4 mana, red, white, and 2 colorless. We have a legendary creature human soldier. It's a 4/4. So, legendary 4/4 for 4. Whenever this attacks, you may tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control. If you do, discover 3. This feels like it's a fixed version of this card right here. Winota, Joiner of Forces. Right, we got a 4/4 for 4. And on an attack trigger, you might be able to put more stuff out onto the battlefield. But boy, is this a far cry. A far, far cry from Winota. This has to survive. This must be the thing that attacks. And you have to tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control. That's not too hard to do with artifacts, right? You could get blood tokens or map tokens or what have you. And then if you do, you discover 3, and you might get, free creatures, free removal spells. That sounds great and all. Except this has to survive. And even if it survives to attack, in order to get its value, you have to tap other stuff you could have used. And it won't be there to block that turn. And maybe you end up having to make a weird or unprofitable attack in order to get its trigger. There's just a lot of problems with turning this on, to where I feel like this card's probably not that good. Now, it's just an uncommon, so if you want to give it a whirl, that's fine. But I just feel like not only does it not go in a wide variety of decks, but it might not be good enough. Master's Guide Mural. This is 5 mana, blue, white, 3 colorless. Uncommon artifact. Hey, I guess this one's not a legendary creature. It's the only one, isn't it? Yeah, every single one of these is a legendary creature except for this. Huh. Alright, yeah, it's just a plain Jane artifact. When this ETBs, you create a 4/4 white and blue golem artifact creature token. So, okay, you get an overpriced 4/4. You get 2 artifacts onto the battlefield. That's not nothing. Alright, it's doing something. And then later on, for 7 mana, 2 white, a blue, and 4, you can craft with an artifact, which can include one that's in your graveyard. And you can exile it, and it comes back as the Master's Manufactory. Still an artifact, still blue-white. And it taps to create a 4/4 white and blue golem artifact creature token only if this or another artifact entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So, the turn that it comes back as the Manufactory, you get to go ahead and make another golem with it, right? So, you spent 7 mana, at least you get a 4/4. And then, in order to trigger it on future turns, you need an artifact to have entered the battlefield under your control. Which is not at all hard to do. It doesn't cost any mana to tap it at that point. Right? You paid all that mana up front. You paid 5 to get it down, you paid 7 to flip it. Now if it hangs around, as long as you're making Phyrexian Mites or blood tokens or whatever, then you're also making 4/4 golems. And that could be pretty good. Now the card is pricey in terms of mana. So do you think you can cobble together a deck where you stall the game to reach this point where you get huge amounts of value out of this card? Maybe. And you'll still have a terrible time against people who play Farewell. But, you know, a lot of decks roll over to a Farewell that's at a badly timed moment. So I don't know if you can plan for that situation. But it seems like there's something here. It wants to be in a deck that makes artifacts, but that's very easy to do. So I think this could be a tool for the toolbox. Finally, we have Ushbenbach, the Great Mistake, and boy, isn't it. A blue, a black, and 3 colorless. This is a 6/4 for 5. The legendary creature Skeleton Horror. It has Vigilance and Menace. So, as far as keywords and its size goes, it's fair for the mana cost. Not exciting or anything, but it's big enough to tangle. You know, it's big enough to trade with the opponent's 6/6 dinosaur, or you know, trade with a Sholdred. So it's okay in terms of that. Usually I like some value baked into it. This one's value is baked in with its Descend 8 ability. Now, Descend 4 is not that hard to hit. Descend 8 is, well, it's a bit of a concerted effort. You can get there. But that means it doesn't just, you know, go into any deck. Right, there's a specific self-mill kind of a deck that wants this. Maybe. We'll get to that. So you pay a black, a blue, and 4 colorless, 6 mana. You return this from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. So you can't do this forever because the finality counter means if it would go to a graveyard from the battlefield, it gets exiled. The only way you can bring this back with the finality counter and then keep doing more shenanigans is if you bounce it to your hand. Going back to your hand doesn't make it exile instead. So there's a little bit of play there. Or some really weird scenarios. There's a couple of cards that can pull counters off of things. So you could pull the finality counter off of it. That's really going into left field, though. But you need 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, and it's only at sorcery speed. If this was at instant speed, it would be much more exciting, much more tempting. As it is, I think what we're looking at here is a card that would have been pretty exciting 20 years ago. You know, about 20 years ago, we were coming out of Mercadian Masks and, like, Onslaught. And, oh, what else was around that time? Odyssey. Odyssey block, kind of heading into Mirrodin. Into, like, my current age of Magic. And, this card might not have made it then, but it would have turned some heads. I think people would have tried it back then. I still don't think it would have been good enough, really, even then, but people would have been interested. Now, it seems really overpriced. Not for limited, of course, and that's, you know, this is a limited card. And I guess if you've got a self-mill deck and you're going above 60 cards, and you don't have a whole lot of the rares filled out, and you're trying to fill in the gaps, right, to make it a whole big pile of cards above 60. At that point, there's probably a home for this card. But I think this card is a trap. I think it's too expensive for what you get. You're not guaranteed to get the value off of it, right? If you could kind of guarantee that this could come back at least once, it's a lot of mana, but, you know, there might be a deck that would want it, but they could keep you off of Descend 8 by exiling things from your graveyard. Or you might have trouble getting up to 5 and 6 mana in some games. Or have better things to do with that mana. Or pulling this back once with a finality counter might not be enough recursion. Right, there's a bit of value there, coming back once, but if the opponent immediately kills it the, second time that it arrives, you gain some value, but was it enough value? Was it worth it to put the card in your deck at that point? And you had to do it on your turn, at sorcery speed. And I think the answer is no. I don't think I can recommend that you craft this card. I'm going to, though, because I'm a completionist. Alright, it's time for me to craft a few cards here. There we go. And let's run through the multicolor rares and mythics here. I'll try not to make this too long. Kellen, I've seen Covert Go Blue. He's another YouTuber doing some good work with this card. So he's already a 2/3 for 2 that when he attacks, you reveal the top card if it's a creature with mana value 3 or less, which is probably like your whole deck. Put it in your hand. Otherwise, you can put it into your graveyard. Yeah, I see Kellen draw him cards all the time in white aggressive decks like this. You can also have a touch of green, so you can play Journey On for 1 green sorcery. Recreate X map tokens, where X is 1 plus the number of opponents who control an artifact. You get at least 1 map token. If your opponent has an artifact in one-on-one play, then you get 2 map tokens. Pretty good for 1 green. They can, get you past lands. They can make your creatures larger to get lethal faster. They're relevant. Good card. If you want this in a deck, you might want more than 1. Amalia Benavides Aguirre. White and a black. 2/2 legendary creature vampire scout. A rare. Ward, pay 3 life. A little bit of protection there. Or you could consider it aggression, right? Because in order to stop this thing, your opponent has to pay life. So you could just be pressuring their life total with that kind of a ward. She also says whenever you gain life, she explores. Then, if her power is exactly 20, destroy all other creatures. That's like a little ribbon ability. If you manage to pull it off, put a feather in your cap, unlock an achievement. I don't know. That's fine. But mostly just, she's a 2-drop that has ward that explores when you gain life. So she's going to get a bunch of counters. She's also going to get you a bunch of land. She can also fill up your graveyard. It's neat. The stuff she's doing here is neat. And yeah, definitely like it for a life gain deck. Probably don't throw her into just any deck. But she's not a bad aggressive 2-drop if you're just doing like a white-black aggressive deck. She'd be okay at that role. The Ancient One. This is a mythic. There's a lot to say about this. Blue-black, 8/8. Yeah, 8/8 for 2. Legendary creature, Spirit God. Descend 8. So the Ancient One can't attack or block unless there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. Okay, so you have to turn it on before it can fisticuffs. Also has an activated ability of a blue, a black, and 2. You can draw a card, then discard a card. When you discard a card this way, target player mills cards equal to its mana value. So it does give you a way to fill up your own graveyard. It also gives you a way to mill out the opponent. if you're so inclined. And it also puts an 8/8 on the battlefield for 2. And there are some combinations, you might say, that you can do with this. Like what, you might ask? Well, here's a couple for starters. One's called Fight Rigging. Now, that puts you into green, so now you're in a 3-color deck. But if on turn 2 you play the Ancient One, now on turn 3 you play Fight Rigging, then when you put a +1 counter on this thing, it's going to have 9 power, and it's going to trigger the Fight Rigging, and you're going to cast the spell under the Fight Rigging for free. That could be game-breaking. You know, the spell under your Fight Rigging might be Breach the Multiverse, which you already wanted permanents in your graveyard, right? And you've got this alternate plan of milling out the opponent with the Ancient One. So that's good too. Plus, oh yeah, you've cast a free Breach the Multiverse on turn 3, potentially getting any combination of 2 creatures and or planeswalkers from you and the opponent. If your opponent's not playing creatures, it's likely they have planeswalkers. So Breach the Multiverse is pretty good at getting hits. Alright, so that's one idea of how you might use the Ancient One. Oh yeah, then there's this guy, Ob Nixilis the Adversary. So, 1 black and red. A 3 loyalty legendary planeswalker. And, it's got Casualty X. So, that means you can sacrifice a creature as an additional cost. If you do, you copy the spell. The copy, Ob Nixilis, is not legendary and has starting loyalty X. I think you're seeing what I'm getting at here. You play the Ancient One on turn 2. On turn 3, you play Ob Nixilis with a Casualty copy that's going to have 8 loyalty. And with 8 loyalty, you can do the ultimate of -7, target player draws 7 cards and loses 7 life immediately. So you could go ahead and draw yourself 7. At that point, losing 7 life probably doesn't matter. Ob Nixilis can make devils and then subsequently gain you life back. Also, you just drew an extra 7 cards after putting out 2 planeswalkers on turn 3. Probably not doing too bad, is what I'm saying. Or you could save it for a second, right? You could save the trigger on the second Ob, and if the opponent doesn't deal with it that turn, maybe turn 4. Just hear me out here. Maybe turn 4, you play Sheoldred. And then you target the opponent with the -7. And then they lose 14 life from Sheoldred's triggers, and they lose 7 life from Ob Nixilis' ability. They take 21, and they lose the game. That's another thing you could do with the Ancient One. By the way, you also have the real copy of Ob Nixilis, so you could also be making a devil or plussing him to put more pressure on them if they're above 21 life. You know. And if they survived all of that, they're still going to have to make it through their draw step on their turn, or Sheoldred's going to deal another 2 damage to them. Okay. So there's 2 examples of things you could do with the Ancient One. Some other things that come to mind. There's this lady, Voldaren Thrillseeker. So you have to wait until turn 4 in order to have enough mana open. But you can get down the Ancient One, you know, sometime turn 2 or 3. And then once you've got 4 mana available, turn 4, let's say, then you play the Voldaren Thrillseeker. You back up 2 onto the Ancient one. Now it has 10 power. And now you can pay 1 and sacrifice it. And it deals 10 damage to any target. Huh. That's a lot to go to the opponent's dome. So I guess the point is, having a creature this large for this low of a mana cost, it might not matter that it can't attack or block. You might, maybe, have other things you could do with it in a variety of different colors. Ways to sacrifice it to where something based on its power or toughness matters. There's a lot there. I think this is a widely applicable tool for the toolbox, as a matter of fact, in terms of brewing decks. It's not just for self-mill decks, and it's not just for, mill decks that are trying to mill the opponent either. It works in those decks, it can serve those roles. I feel like there's a lot of other roles it can serve as well, just being an 8/8 for 2. So, yeah, looks pretty good. Whale of the Forgotten, blue and a black. This is a rare sorcery. Descend 8. So you choose 1, but if there's 8 or more permanents in your graveyard as you cast it, instead you can choose as many as you want. You can return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So, sorcery speed, boomerang. Not against lands, though. Boomerang could hit lands. Target opponent discards a card. Kind of weak. Probably not the mode you want to use unless you're picking every mode. Then it's good. Or look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand, the rest into your graveyard. Not bad at all. It'd be better if it was an instant, obviously. But it's serviceable as a card filtration method that fills up your graveyard. Serviceable in that role. Also serviceable as a bounce spell. Not super exciting, but fine. And if you get the Descend 8 turned on, then you can do the trick where you bounce something to the opponent's hand and then it's the only card in their hand and they have to discard it. That's kind of fun. And it replaces itself on top of that. So, if you have all the modes turned on, this could be quite good. It could be very powerful. I don't think it's terrible for the first and third mode if you don't have Descend 8 turned on yet. It's just not exciting in that case. It's a bit too fair as a sorcery speed card for 2. It's playable, but yeah. But if you get it turned on, it's very, very powerful for 2. So, for that reason, since you really need the Descend 8 turned on, I don't know that this is a widely applicable tool. It's not bad. And the card itself helps turn on Descend 8. It still depends on the construction of your deck, though. Every deck has land, so there's always a chance you can get to 8 permanents. But it's better if you have some things that are not sorceries somewhere in the deck. Anyway, I think it's fine. I think it would be okay, but I wouldn't run out to craft it. And if you play Draft, this can come around as like a bulk rare that you pick up later in the draft. So that's cool too. Saheeli, the Sun's Brilliance. So we have a 2/2 for a blue and red mythic legendary creature human artificer. And she's got the activated ability blue-red tap. Create a token that's a copy of another target creature or artifact you control, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Now, that is truly some shenanigans of what you could do with the card. It's also A 2/2 for 2 that has to survive to get back to your turn to pay 2 mana and tap that the opponent could blow out with a removal spell by destroying the thing that she targets. And then to add insult to injury, they might have a removal spell for Saheeli after that's happened. That's probably why you haven't seen widespread adoption of her yet. It's because she's fragile. Fragile and easy to disrupt. Most people in Standard, especially Best of One Standard, have some kind of a plan to deal with aggro, which means they have a plan of some kind to deal with a small creature even early in the game. You could try to wait till later in the game, of course. Maybe if you had a way to give her haste as soon as she comes down, and a way to protect her with some of your blue spells. That would be interesting, but maybe too much work. Right, a few too many pieces to all set up and come together to finally, get Saheeli down and copy something. Maybe it would have been easier to just win through some other means at that point. So, Saheeli can go into a wide variety of decks because she copies creatures and artifacts. Because she's a bit fragile, I don't think I'd go out of my way to craft her, especially at Mythic. But if you happen to open her, and you happen to be in a blue-red deck, and you've got some creatures or artifacts in the deck, you could run a copy of her, see if she gets there. The upside on the card is really high. So, that part's not to be underestimated. Molten Collapse. Red and a black. Rare sorcery. You choose one of the two modes if you descended this turn. You choose both instead. And again, Descend is just a permanent card going into your graveyard from anywhere. Not too hard to do. So the first mode is just destroy target creature or planeswalker, and that's worth it. That right there, if you're in this color combination, this is a perfectly serviceable spell, just at this mana cost for the first mode. Done deal. Second mode. Destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. You can blow up any token that's not a creature or land, which, if it was a creature, the first mode kills it. But it seems like the second mode is mostly good at blowing up token artifacts. We also have token enchantments a little bit now. The second mode on the card, you'll find treasure tokens and blood tokens, and you'll find things to blow up with it that won't, most of the time they won't be super high value. Once in a while you'll find like a nice piece of equipment or a little enchantment or some piddling annoying thing that's mana value 1 or less that still you'd rather not have on the battlefield. But it seems like usually this is going to be good for blowing up token artifacts on the second mode. The first mode is good enough, though. So, should you craft the card? I mean, black and red don't have that hard of a time blowing up creatures. Planeswalkers, though. At 2 mana removal for a Planeswalker might be worth the trouble. Seems good. Huatli, Poet of Unity. I'm going to skip this one. I covered it in my green section, and that was a mistake. I always like to leave the monocolor cards that have off-color activations and put them in the multicolor section. But I already reviewed Huatli in green, so go back and check out my green commentary to hear what I had to say about Huatli. Abuelo, Ancestral Echo. 1 white and blue. This is a 2/2 rare legendary creature Spirit. It has flying and ward 2, so it's at least a little bit hard to remove from the ward. You can pay 1 white and blue, exile another target creature or artifact you control, and it returns to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Now, I want to warn you that if you do this on an end step, it will not come back until the next end step, at the next turn. So if you want it to come back on the same turn, you need to do it before the end step. So this flickers things. Flicker in the way that it comes back, end of turn. This can save permanents from a board sweeper. It can re-trigger things for value, right, in the way that cards like Yorion and stuff do. It can blank the opponent's removal spells. The only problem, right, it does a lot of work. The only problem is 3 is a lot of mana. Usually you don't have just 3 mana laying around to play a game of chicken with the opponent. The time when you do have that much mana laying around is against a control deck. Now this can't save itself from a board sweeper, but if you get this card out and you've got some mana open, then the control player and you are kind of in a game to see who can protect their thing better, who can get more value. If you can afford to, pay the blinks on this, or if you want to keep the mana open to respond to them doing something. In your average game of Magic, where someone's coming at you with creatures, this feels like just another spirit. I think it could be cool, but only in a slower game. So this is a card that could be very, very powerful, but it's a big investment of mana. So take that for what you will. Squirming Emergence, piece of trash. I'm kidding. Although in the art it looks like it's a piece of trash that's just reanimated. Black, green, 1, rare sorcery, Fathomless Descent, return to the battlefield. Target non-land permanent card in your graveyard with mana value less than or equal to the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. This card is a little busted, it turns out. Being able to regrow something, reanimate something for 3. It's not even a creature, it could be like, Portal to Phyrexia or whatever, and it often is. Turns out that's pretty strong, and maybe a bit too strong. And it pairs terribly well with a little enchantment. Bounding the Third Path. Not Chapter 1. But unless you're going to get value off of it, you can just skip Chapter 1 here. You go straight to Chapter 2. You mill 4 cards. So you've put some stuff in your graveyard. Chapter 3, you add this enchantment to your graveyard, right? Because you sacrificed it as a saga. And maybe you've got Squirming Emergence in the graveyard to copy at that point and cast the copy from Chapter 3. It's okay if you don't, though, to just use this as a setup piece to get a bunch of cards into your graveyard. But later in the game, this gives you, copies for 5, 6, 7, and 8 of Squirming Emergence because you get to cast the ones in the graveyard all over again. And it's a great card to turn it on in the first place. Graveyard Hate does shut this down. So if you're going, turn 2 and you're playing Unlicensed Hearse, this is a really good one. Can turn into a very big creature later in the game. Exiles cards 2 at a time. Soulless Jailer, this is a really narrow piece of tech. I don't see most people running this one, but it's out there. Agatha's Soul Cauldron, people do more commonly run this card. It is another 2-drop that can targetedly remove stuff from the graveyard. All of that is to say there is counterplay to this strategy. But a lot of people probably don't want to make space in their deck in Best of 1 to do that. Because they're trying to be an aggressive deck and win with damage quickly. Or they're trying to fight an aggressive deck that's dealing damage quickly. Which means the opponent that really is going to have that counterplay against you is a techie control deck that has a bad matchup against this kind of reanimator strategy. And so they make a point of adding Graveyard Hate to their deck, play it on time, on curve, and lock you out of the game. Now that might mean that you need to add more artifact removal to your deck, and, counterplay goes back and forth. But the card is good. The card is playable. Does it go into a wide variety of decks? No. No, there's kind of one specific Squirming Emergence deck at the moment that really likes this card and can turn it on. There are different top-ends you can put in the deck to reanimate with it, but whether you want to craft it or not, it's up to you. I don't consider it a toolbox card, just something that's powerful. The Myco Tyrant, green, black, 1, mythic. Legendary creature, Elder Fungus. It is a star with trample. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control that are fungi and or saplings. So it is a fungus itself. So it will be at least a 1/1 as long as its creature types aren't removed. And that means it does indeed die if it loses all abilities or gets turned into a legitimate business person, I believe. But at the beginning of your end step, you create X 1/1 black fungus creature tokens with this creature can't block, where X is the number of times you descended this turn. And descend is pretty easy to kick on. And this card could put out a lot of little fungus creature tokens. Now they can't block, but they make this thing get very big. And they can add a lot of pressure onto the board going wide. And of course there are ways to pump up your tokens, doing an overrun type effect with Nissa with a -7. Or you could be putting +1 counters on your stuff with the White Virtue. There's different ways to go about it to make them more threatening. Probably the one I like the most, and that no one else but me is ever going to do, is pairing these little tokens that can't block with Poppet Stitcher and flipping it into the Poppet Factory, which will turn these little black fungus tokens into 3/3s that lose all abilities, which means it loses the ability this creature can't block. Just like where the Decayed Zombie tokens lose their Decayed status at that point. It's also very good on these. Could even be good on Phyrexian Mites, depending on whether you're trying to win with damage or poison. And I know, no one's going to do that. That's just me. But I find it amusing. Anyway, This card, I think you can't just drop it into any deck. I think you really need to be trying to get the value off of it. So I don't necessarily think of it as a toolbox card. Anim Pakal, Thousandth Moon. 1 red, white. We have a 1/2 rare legendary creature human soldier. Now that stat line doesn't sound impressive, but wait. Whenever you attack with one or more non-gnome creatures, that's not hard. Put a +1/+1 counter on Anim Pakal. Alright, so right away if she survives to combat, she is a 2/3. Then create X 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens that are tapped and attacking, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Anim Pakal. This card is good. You need creatures, you need to be attacking, and you need things that are not gnomes. That's not hard to do. Does it go into every deck? No, but there's multiple different ways to build an aggro deck. You know, you can have like a curve where a 3-drop is like the very top end of your deck, and everything else is mostly a 1-drop. That would be fine. Or Anim Pakal could be part of a more mid-rangey kind of build where you have an aggressive start at the beginning of the game, but this is like a way to build value and board presence in a larger, like kind of mid-rangey strategy. Goes fine there too. Just a really strong card, and then you can maybe have an artifact deck where all these little artifact creatures are coming down from these attack triggers. And that could be an angle. For all those reasons, I think this is a pretty solid card that can go into more than one type of deck. Veto, Fanatic of Aclazotz. 2 white and a black. Legendary creature, Vampire Demons, 4/4. Mythic rare, flying. So got a 4/4 flyer for 4. It's, yeah. Whenever you sacrifice another permanent, you gain 2 life if it's the first time the ability is resolved. Okay, so first one's not hard to pull off, but all that does is gain you 2. Alright. If it's the second time, each opponent loses 2 life. Okay, now you're talking. But we have to sacrifice 2 things. Now if we want to trigger it on the opponent's turn, we need to sacrifice at least 4 things. 2 on our turn, 2 on the opponent's turn. That could be a big ask. If it's the third time, create a 4/3 white and black vampire demon creature token with flying. That's cool. If you get to the third one, it pays you back with another big 4-power flyer, and that is more material on the battlefield you could sacrifice. Normally you would not sacrifice a 4-power flyer as fodder, but weird things happen in Magic games. So, this card is clearly narrow. Yeah, I'll just straight up say it. This card is clearly narrow. There's a very niche application of this in an Aristocrats deck that doesn't just want to sacrifice like one thing a turn. No, no, no. You need to be able to sacrifice at least 2 things a turn, 3 being far preferable. Now there are ways to do that, but at that point you have built the deck around this card. So this is like a build around Mythic. This is kind of like the opposite of a toolbox card. So for this crafting guide, avoid. The Belligerent. We got a vehicle. Red. Blue. 2 colorless. We have a legendary artifact vehicle. It's a 5/5. It's a rare. It crews for 3. So if you want to use it as a blocker, it does not have haste. So the turn it comes down for 4, you need something with at least 3 power to crew it. Whenever this attacks, create a treasure token. Okay, so it ramps you. Until end of turn, you may look at the top card of your library anytime, and you may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. That's neat. This isn't like red exile card draw, because it doesn't exile them. And that's, probably because it's also part blue. You only use what you need, right? Anything that you can't use, that you don't need, it doesn't get exiled, it just stays on the top of your library. This card is cool, however, I feel like you're not quite getting enough oomph. I just feel like it's not quite there. It can kind of draw you a card, sort of, if you manage to attack with it. And it is harder to muck with a vehicle. In some cases, it's harder to destroy an artifact. One of the better kill spells in the format is Go for the Throat. Doesn't hit artifacts. That being said, though, lots of people are going to be able to blow this thing up before you get an attack trigger from it. Which means you don't get the treasure, you don't get the stuff off the top of your library, and you tapped a 3-power creature at sorcery speed. Well, not at sorcery speed, but on your turn. You know what I'm saying. There are a lot of problems with this card and with getting this card to work, and I don't feel strongly that you should go out of your way to craft it. Sovereign Okenek Ahau. Green, a white, 2 colorless. Says, this is a 3/4 legendary creature, Cat Noble. It is a mythic. Ward 2. So at least it's a little bit hard to target to get rid of when you play it. Its stats do not impress me for its mana cost, but let's keep reading. Whenever this attacks, for each creature you control with power greater than the creature's base power, put a number of +1/+1 counters on that creature equal to the difference. So, this is a super fiddly, weird sounding ability that sounds like it was made for Commander and not for Standard. Because Commander gets all the weird, mountain of text cards like this that are legendary. But let's try to figure out what it actually does. So, for each creature you control with power greater than the creature's base power. So let's say you've got, in this color combination, King Darien the 48th. And he's giving your creatures +1/+1. When this attacks, it's going to see that your other creatures have a difference of 1 greater power. And so you would put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you have, because the difference in how much power it is above its base is 1. But the next time you attack, the +1 counter also counts for increasing the difference between its base and what it is currently. Now that difference is at least 2. So then, when this attacks the second time, you would put 2 +1/+1 counters out, because the difference was 2 after that first attack. So, this kind of meets my definition of a win more card. It snowballs, right? Definitely snowballs in a way to where your creatures get enormous. They can get stupidly big, right? If you were to play an overrun type effect, something where your creatures get +2/+2, or God forbid, Nissa, maybe, with her -7. Which would just be extreme overkill, and that's kind of what this card is about. It seems like this card is about extreme overkill, where if it works, it's outrageous, and if you don't have the way to trigger it, it's very sad. But yeah, if your creatures have +3/+3 in trample, or +7/+7 in trample, or whatever, this is gonna put counters equal to the power difference on those creatures. Now, note that you don't have to attack with them if you don't want to. It just requires that this attacks. Which, it's a 3/4 with Ward 2 for 4. Seems like the opponent could probably block and kill this thing. So hopefully, if you're attacking in with this thing, you do have some kind of big team pump effect that's going off that turn. It's giving you your whole team like +2 power or plus, whatever. To where this can make a reasonably profitable attack and pump the whole team at the same time. So maybe it's just lethal in that case. But since it requires setup, and it requires you to get all the way back around to your turn after you play this thing. Now it does have ward, so it's not easy to shoot down with a single target removal spell. But you want other creatures out for this thing to be pumping up. And that makes it very, very vulnerable to a board sweeper, where you have got no special value for playing this card, and then it just gets swept up along with your other creatures in a board sweeper, like a Sunfall. And all of that's to say that you gotta do some convincing before I think this card's good. Give it haste, maybe? Give it haste and have a buff already in place, ready to go, and maybe it wins the game from out of nowhere. But you gotta jump through so many hoops to reach that point. I wouldn't craft it. I wouldn't tell you to go out of your way for it. I don't believe in it. Deep Fathom Echo. Green, a blue, and 2 colorless. We have a Merfolk Spirit. It's not legendary, it's just a creature. It's a 4/4, it's a rare. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, this explores. So, alright, that's handy. You get a 4/4 for 4, then you get a little explore, maybe get a little value. It can happen every turn if the opponent doesn't kill it. Then you may have this become a copy of another creature you control until end of turn. This does not hit ETB triggers. So, copying Etali, it would turn into a giant trampler, but it wouldn't do Etali's ETB trigger effect. Still, it seems like there could be some real shenanigans on the kind of stuff you could turn this into. Unfortunately, Magic's gotten into a habit lately of putting a lot of its best creatures and best effects onto legendary things. And now everything is just legendary. It feels like the pool of non-legendary stuff is getting smaller and smaller as the years go on. And you don't really want to copy a legend with this effect, because then legend rules. So, but you can probably still find something interesting. All it's really got to be is more interesting than a 4/4 with no abilities. Whether that means it's got something when it deals combat damage to a player, or an on-attack trigger, or a death trigger, or just a bunch of keywords. There's some cool stuff you could turn this into, I'm sure. And the fact that it's a 4/4 for 4 that can explore at the beginning of every combat is not useless. I don't think it's super exciting, and I'm not sure what the combo is right now, but I feel like this can go in an Explore deck. I feel like it could go in a Merfolk deck. I don't know of a green-blue spirit deck, but if such a thing existed, you know. And then there's the whole creature copying aspect, and that means it could be a build-around kind of card, where you've got a bunch of clones and stuff. It feels like not a very powerful card exactly, but a flexible tool nonetheless. So, kind of on the fence with it. Polani's Hatcher. This is a great card. Red, green, 3 colorless. You get a rare dinosaur. It's a 5/3. Other dinosaurs you control have haste. That's really dangerous. What I tend to find happens in the dinosaur deck is they have this great threat density that occurs where you kind of need to get rid of the Polani's Hatcher because it's giving other stuff haste, but it's not the most threatening thing necessarily. Or you're having trouble figuring out what the most threatening thing is. Maybe something else tempts you with your removal spell, but what you should have killed was this. So, 5/3 for 5, other dinos have haste. When it ETBs, you get 2 0/1 green dinosaur egg creature tokens. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control one or more eggs, sacrifice an egg, then create a 3/3 green dinosaur creature token. That's great. So right away, immediately, you can sacrifice an egg, get a 3/3 dino, and it has haste. And if all of that happens, then you've put out 8 power and 6 toughness with 3/3 of it having haste for 5 mana. And you're threatening to put out another 3 the next turn with the other egg. Does this go in a deck that does not have dinosaurs? Well, it gives dinosaurs haste. So it really feels like to get the full value off of this card, you should be putting it in a dinosaur deck. However, the card has so much aggression and value and board presence baked into it that I don't think it's necessarily a bad choice to put it in a non-dinosaur deck. Just to put out the eggs and turn them into 3/3s with haste. I don't think that's a terrible use of a magic card. I think 8 power and 6 toughness, and threatening to put out the next turn up to 11 power and 9 toughness. I don't think that's necessarily a bad use of your 5 mana at all. It just gets better with other dinosaurs, though. This card seems really quite strong. Mostly for the dinosaur deck, but keep an open mind. Alright, Quintorius Kant. So we have a Planeswalker here, white, red, 3 colorless, mythic rare, 4 starting loyalty, legendary Planeswalker Quintorius. So, 4 loyalty, 5 mana. Let's read here. First off, he's got this static effect. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, this deals 2 damage to each opponent, you gain 2 life. Well, that's pretty strong. Exile is kind of how red draws cards, and it works pretty well. This doesn't work for your lands coming out of exile, but it's not hard at all to get a bunch of spells chaining out of exile. And that's draining the opponent for 2 every time, and giving you a buffer of life. What else does he do? +1, create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. Okay, cool. He pluses to make creatures. You just plus him all day and get a ton of 3 power board presence. Protects himself. Not the worst, thing to pressure the opponent with. It's just a bunch of 3-power critters. Not bad at all. For -3, discover 4. Discover is fiddly, of course. You can build your deck to take advantage of it in such a way where you've got like adventure spells and prototypes and stuff where their printed mana value is 5 or more. And then you can discover and hit the... you can either build the deck that way and just hit like a silver bullet of something that you put in there to specifically hit that costs 4 or less. You can also just put this in a deck and gain a bunch of value, to where you're not necessarily always hitting the same thing when you discover 4, but it's going to be a pretty good deal. You'll either draw the card or cast the card for free. And he's got an ultimate, -6. Exile any number of target cards from your graveyard. Add red for each card exiled this way. You may play those cards this turn. Ay, 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 ay. And if you did that, and he still was around, if he still had loyalty, every one of those things that you played would be a spell from exile, which means you would drain the opponent for 2. For each of those. And you just made a pile of mana to cast those spells with. This is strong. This is a strong Planeswalker. It is very good. I think you could pretty reasonably drop it into just about any deck that's not aggro. You could do a mid-range Quintorius, you could do a control Quintorius. You could probably figure out how to do a ramp Quintorius. That would be weird, but I bet you could figure out a way. So, yeah. If you like this color combination, you like messing with Planeswalkers a bit, Quintorius seems really strong. Give him a try. And finally, we've got Gishath, Sun's Avatar. Red, green, white, and 5 colorless. So we got an 8-drop here, folks. It is a legendary creature, Dinosaur Avatar. It is a 7/6. It is mythic rare. So, 7/6 for 8 is not an impressive size of its body. That's the same size as a scaled worm. However, we have some keywords here. Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. That perks it up a bit. So we can already come in with 7 damage haste. That's going to trample over whatever's in front of it and is vigilant to block on our turn. So, okay, I'm listening. Whenever this deals combat damage to a player, and it can come out with haste, it can come in with trample, so it can kind of come out of nowhere a little bit if you're not paying attention. You reveal that many cards from the top of your library, right? The amount of combat damage dealt to a player. Put any number of dinosaur creature cards from among them on the battlefield. The rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is not a toolbox card. This is a dinosaur deck card. And specifically, it's for a dinosaur deck that wants to get to 8 mana. That's probably not every dinosaur deck. But it seems pretty great in that deck. I have seen it put out a stupid amount of value of giant dinosaurs when it comes down and hits the opponent. In that case, the opponent was me. It seems like fun. If you want to take this angle with your dinosaur deck, you know, who am I to stop you? But in terms of a crafting guide for making a toolbox of cards to go in a wide variety of decks, this is a narrow card. So I wouldn't recommend it for that. Alright. So, let's see. I'm going to craft 4 rares and 2 mythics out of this bunch. I believe this card can have some application outside of the dinosaur deck, and it's obviously good in the dinosaur deck. I'm going to craft at least one copy right now. This card just seems really great in this color combination. I think it can be in a variety of decks as long as you're attacking. So, yeah, Anim Pakal. I will go ahead and craft at least one here. Life gain is a fun strategy, and Amalia seems like a card that I can really get into the value that she can provide while you're gaining life. Also, again, I don't think she's the worst 2-drop in these colors. Just for being aggressive, the ward cost makes it hard to stop her. Helps you race with the opponent. So I think there are things to like here for sure. But it's definitely more of a life gain card. So this is kind of a personal choice on my part. So I like to be up on my removal tech, and in particular, Planeswalker removal. Cheap, easy Planeswalker removal is, I don't know what kind of decks you go up against on the ladder, but I find I have more trouble with really greedy Planeswalker piles than with some other more creature-focused decks. So I like to keep an eye out for things that deal with Planeswalkers. And Molten Collapse seems like a very reasonable removal spell. I'm happy to go ahead and craft one here. Yeah, this card enables so many shenanigans just by virtue of its ridiculous size for the price of mana that it's at. I do not regret one bit spending a mythic to get another copy of this card. This is actually going to end up being my 3rd copy of Quintorius. I realize that's a lot for a 5-drop, but this Planeswalker is incredibly strong. If you are making this a more central piece of a deck, right, you don't have to, but if you really play up the part where you're casting spells from exile, then Quintorius can be the engine of winning the game and keeping you alive. Anyway, yeah, he's great. I'm going to craft the 3rd copy here. And that'll wrap it up for Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Join me next time when I will probably try to get a couple of deck brews out for Best of 1 Standard, most likely. And then we're going to roll into the next spoiler season and the next set, and I'll have to update the toolbox all over again. Hopefully I will be in better health, and it'll be easier for me to update the series faster. Anyway, stay tuned. Until next time, do the YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, and the big one is checking out the other videos. And never stop honing your critical thinking and empathy.